The kids, what they really love are my stories. And I probably have about 10 or 15 different stories they like to hear me tell. The first one was another true story. Sandra had taken Suzanne and Sarah to Washington and New York. And they stayed in a great hotel in Washington, a very famous hotel. And then they went on to New York, and I met them in New York. And we took them everywhere, you know, to the toy stores, up the Empire State Building, out to the Statue of Liberty, to the museums, everywhere. I mean, no two little girls ever had such a vacation. Oh, and Sandra took them to high tea at the Plaza, and we took them to see the Lion King, and we introduced them to the star of the Lion King. No two girls ever had a trip like that in their lives. So on the way home, we were in the car. First of all, I couldn't find the car. I don't know where I parked it in the Pittsburgh airport. We finally found the car, and they realized that they didn't have their dresses, and she had bought them special dresses for New York. I realized I had left them in the US Air lounge. There's nothing I could do about it till we got home, and then I'd call the lounge and so forth. So we called Stephen. I talked to Stephen first, and we're on our way home. He said, "Oh, great, let me talk to the girls." It was Sarah. So Sarah, did you have a good, how's everything? Saba would not let us sit together, and he left our dresses at the airport. What happened, you know, the two of them were sitting side by side with the elbows, which I can't stand in my kids. So the aisle or the row next to it was empty, so I put one of them there. So I separated them on the airplane and forgot their dresses. So I then lectured to Sarah for about 5 minutes. "Sarah, you're just in New York and Washington." And I enumerated the places that we visited. "And how can you, after Saba was so wonderful to you, start out and tell your daddy that?" So now we called Karen. And the Karen said, "How was your trip?" And she was talking to I guess it was Sarah again. And Sarah said, "Saba left our clothes in New York, and he separated us on the airplane." So I thought I was the world's greatest Saba, and I guess they thought I was the worst. Norm and I lived alone, and Norm was the only one who had a car. The thing was, it couldn't start on itself, on its own. So whenever we went somewhere, we had to park on a hill. He would get in and I would push, and he'd have it in neutral, and he'd slip it into gear. I'd jump in the car and we would go. Norm was a maniac in medical school, as he was when he practiced. Once he was going back to Cleveland, he was speeding, and the police stopped him, and he had to go to court. So he showed up in his short medical school jacket with a stethoscope around his neck and gloves hanging out of his pocket. And Judge questioned. He said, "Well, Judge," he said, this car was right behind me, and I had just read about, cars pulling up behind you and either shooting you or pulling you over, and they weren't policemen." And he said, "I was scared, and that's why I kept going and faster and faster." And he was let off scot-free. He was always up to something, and always, Norm is a little bit like Grandma. He was always helping people do different things. We had a good time in medical school. I can fall asleep anywhere at any time for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and I'll awaken exactly when I have to. If I have 12 minutes in the office, or for some reason I'm between patients, or I'm waiting for something, or toward the end of the day, I'll lie down. It takes me 10 seconds to go to sleep. I sleep 12 minutes and wake up. So that was a good thing that came out of that intern. We were in Brooklyn. We used to go to the Dodgers games. We went to the World Series games the day that Cleveland played the New York Giants. Cleveland had the most wins of any team in the history of baseball in the regular season. They're playing the Giants at Yankee Stadium in the first game. Don't know why it was the first game, but they were. And there was 2 men on base. Vic Wertz was batting. He hit a ball probably as long as it had ever been hit in Yankee Stadium. Willie Mays was playing center field, and he made that fantastic catch running away from the ball, and looked up at the last second in his glove. And Cleveland lost 4 straight games. That was the only bad part about being in Brooklyn. The rest of that year was really great. Stephen and I went to New York and back in one day, and I came back. I took out my sport coat from the area above me and put it on, and I wear a 40 or a 42, and I came home, and Sandra doesn't allow me to hang my stuff in the closet. I have to put it on a little thing that pulls out so she can always inspect my clothes. If they're dirty, then she takes care of that. So she picked this coat up. First of all, it was huge. It was a 46. It fit me like an overcoat instead of a sport jacket. And in the pocket inside were 2 tickets to London. And there was an address on them. A guy lived in Pittsburgh. I had taken his jacket. It was a 46. I don't know how I ever did that, and left mine. So I called him and explained I had his jacket I would get it back to. And I was really surprised because he was angry. And I would have thought if I lost my tickets with my tickets to London, it was a surprise visit, he told me, or a surprise trip for his wife, I would have been very happy, but this guy was really mad. One that was happy is I got off the airplane in Florida and took my carry bag, in the rack up front. They used to have them in the airplane where you could hang them up. And I got home and hung up the things, and Sandra, made sure everything was clean, and she took it out. It was a bridal dress. Holy cats, that was bad. So I called the airport and then called the bride, and she was happy. She was very happy to get her bridal dress back, and at the end of the day they had told her, well, this is probably the person who took it was a bag similar to yours, so you take his. So we exchanged bags. That was okay. The kids always get a big kick out of that. Then there was a bad day when we had just had Sandra's Chrysler convertible fixed, or refurbished and so forth, cleaned up. And I backed out of the driveway. She always objected to my driving her car, still does. I backed out of the driveway, but I forgot to open the garage door. So then then we raised the garage door, and I took my car instead, and I backed into someone who had packed their truck there. So I had, 2 accidents in the same day. Another day I was going somewhere, I backed out of the driveway, then you have to sort of turn and go back into the driveway, and I ran into the house. So there were a few accidents like that.
The first Thanksgivings were held at my parents' home, and my father was really keen on this because his father had arrived in this country when my father was 2 years old. And the day they saw the Statue of Liberty in the harbor was Thanksgiving Day. So this took on a very special significance. And so we always had Thanksgiving dinner. And then when Jerry and Stanley joined the family, we started having Thanksgiving dinner at my house in Dover, because my mother, Grandma Sylvia, would get very hyper. She could manage dinner for the four of us and the two of them, 6 people. But once Stanley joined the family, and Jerry, and they had children, she went to pieces. So it was time for me to start having Thanksgiving. So because we had Thanksgiving, we had the first football games, because we also had a huge backyard, and that's where the football games were played for several years. In fact, some of the early movies show the football games there. Then it was moved to the Eigners' backyard, because they had a bigger backyard. And it just sort of evolved, and everybody wanted to come. People would ask to come, relatives, not just the main siblings, but other people would want to join in. It just seemed like a neat thing. And so it's just been like that for all these years. And I think it's very neat, and everybody really, if they can't come, they really feel like they've missed something. I hope that they can always get together and do this. My only worry is that every year it seems to be nicer and nicer and more elaborate. My concern is that the younger people will feel that they have neither the imagination or the wherewithal to pull off something like this, and that it might just disappear. That is my worry, and I think that that is the worry of most of the older people. It's almost getting too nice.
It used to kill me when my kids, you, David, Brian, Frank, Stephen, used to sleep late, like on Saturdays or Sundays. I thought you ought to be up working or doing something. And I found my diary after you were all grown, and it would read like this: went to the movie on Friday night, slept till 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. And this and that. So I realized that I used to sleep as a kid on Saturday mornings too. And on every several pages, walked Terry home tonight. And at one point it said, and I kissed her. And that probably was the greatest achievement in my diary. So in those days, you know, you had a girlfriend. Everybody had a girlfriend, and we all sort of traveled together. You went out as a group, but I think I went with Terry for 3 years and kissed her once.
Fred had picked my boys and I up to go to this tennis center event. I was recuperating from a minor surgery and I couldn't drive. So at the exhibition, Bill said, how about if I take Sandra and the boys home? So he borrowed Velva's car and brought us home, and we visited for a little bit, an hour maybe, and he left. Now, what you might not know about Bill, he's not the best at driving and directions or remembering exactly where he's supposed to be going. I didn't know that then. It might have changed my mind, actually. But about 2 o'clock in the morning, I had a call from Fred. Sandra? Yes. Is Bill still there? I said, what time is it? He said 2 o'clock. I said, oh my gosh, he left hours ago. And so he had run into a little trouble in a slippery road, and police stopped him, and he didn't have his wallet or any ID, and he only knew he was staying at the Levines. And there is a very big phone book in Houston, Texas, filled with Levines. So he ended up in jail until Fred finally started calling around. That was our first meeting. I wouldn't call it a date, but that was the beginning.
In all of our family lives together, there's a Hebrew expression, smochalai, which means depend on me. You know, he asked him to do something or this or that, smochalai. And that means, you know, it probably will never happen, but we use it all the time. There's a joke that goes around our family, or has been going around recently, that's really, I think, a very funny story. It's a story about the Hasidic Fire Brigade. There was a huge fire in New Jersey. It was a fire in a chemical plant, and a huge fire, so that they called the fire companies from all the surrounding cities, but they all stayed within a few hundred yards because the fire was raging so much that they couldn't get near it. They couldn't get through the fire to the building. The fire had encircled the building. And the owner of the factory came out and called all the captains together and said, look, this is a chemical factory. All the formulas for all my chemicals are inside the building in a safe. And if any of you will go in there and retrieve it, I'll give them $100,000. But they were all afraid. Then suddenly this old beat up truck, fire truck, marked the Hasidic Fire Brigade with the firemen in big hats and payas and long coats and socks, came roaring in, never even hesitated when they came to the circle, went right into the fire, right to the fire, and retrieved the chemical formula, put out the fire, and came out. So the man said, you are the most courageous men I have ever seen in my life. You know, I just can't believe it. And he said, I'm not going to give you $100,000. I'm going to give you $200,000. Now, I'd like to know, what are you going to do with the money? So Moshe, who was the captain, said, well, the first thing we're going to do is fix the brakes. I really got away with all of my stories really for a number of years. And just today, as a matter of fact, we reached a crisis because Astrid, who is now 6, said to me, you know, Saba, I believe all your stories that happened to you, but digging to China I don't think is really credible. And I don't know if I believe that story. And I said, well, honey, let me show you something. So I went into the closet and I took out this. And I said, let me read this to you. It said, presented to Dr. William Lippy, 1950, as an honorary emperor of China. And signed Chairman Mao. So there it is, honey. You can read now. Do you want to read it? And Charity said, oh my God. So I'm still in with the China story.